Now, East Africa's real estate sector is gaining traction with strong investor interest in markets like Kenya. Over 3.5 billion rands has already been invested in the property sector. Developers are targeting higher returns and investment activity is expected to grow. The market is shifting toward quality, sustainability and locally driven context-specific development and positioning East Africa as a key real estate growth region. Zahara Khanbai, Director of Commercial Property Finance, East Africa at Absa, joins us with greater insight. Zahara, thanks so much for your time this afternoon. Now, as we get started, let's reflect on what's behind the boom. What is fueling it?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on the call, eh? Yeah, I think the East Africa region, for so many reasons, has actually gained a lot of traction in the eyes of investors across the globe, right? And it's when you focus down and you look at what's really driving that, there's so many factors behind it. I mean, needless to say that from a macroeconomic perspective, East Africa has generally shown quite a bit of resilience in the past when it comes to responses to global factors out there. Needless to say, we do have our own challenges, but I think we've shown quite a bit of resilience. So that's definitely one aspect. I'm talking about things, in response to inflation and interest rates and political stability and the likes, which, in an adverse effect can actually have a huge impact on what's happening on the ground here. If you look at, some of the subsectors on real estate in particular, you look at the residential side, for example. There's so many factors that are contributing to the growth in this sector, and you're looking at urbanization rates, for example, which are almost 4% per year, with an influx of people coming or moving to the city, and that's really spurring a lot of real estate developers to look at affordable housing, for example.
Yeah.
Right. And so you're also getting governments responding to these trends, and they're looking at providing incentives such as cheaper mortgage rates, or increasing the funding budget, for putting up affordable housing units as well, and also creating direct objectives for the national housing players to provide affordable housing. So all of these are, creating an appetite for residential developments as a whole, but also a surge in interest in affordable housing and also mid-market housing developments. And we're really seeing a shift away from high-end residential units. And just something that you mentioned earlier is, we're talking about quality, right? So what we're also seeing is consumers are demanding higher quality housing and accommodation. And really what's being seen is a lot of investors tapping into an asset class that is actually really just emerging now, which is sustainable student accommodation. And what we're seeing here is that there's a real need for accommodation that provides the amenities for a conducive studying environment, right? Whereas historically, student accommodation, for example, was really informal, it was really unregulated, and it was really predominantly provided by landlords that had, a small property near a university or a college. And as a result of this, you're seeing the returns on student and affordable housing both really yielding strong rental returns, and really a steady tenant base, which is what as an investor you're really looking for, right? And if I break it down a little bit further on the commercial side, again, massive traction in this space. Industrial real estate was not talked about much amongst investors, but you're seeing really the growth in e-commerce and improved infrastructure really driving the demand for things like warehousing space, industrial parks, and logistic hubs. If you look at the tech world, which everybody's talking about tech these days, but tech related to real estate was really unheard of before. But again, with the rising internet penetration rates and cloud services, we're seeing a huge demand for data centers, and again, an untapped asset class, right? So a lot of investors are wanting to take advantage of, wanting to be take advantage of being the first mover in that space, and again, take advantage of the high returns. The last thing that I want to mention on this case is the demand for flexible workspaces and co-working spaces. They're really changing the way that offices are being designed and being built, whereas historically traditional office spaces were really dominating the commercial market. And really related to both the commercial and the residential subsectors that I've mentioned, you talked about sustainability, and Kenya, I think, is actually leading on that front. But it is, developers are actually really taking sustainability more seriously in their approach
Yeah.
and in their strategy formations. And I think what we're seeing here is a growing demand for green certified buildings and energy efficient designs. And that's not only helping to address the rising utility costs, but also cater for an ESG conscious investor.
And just on the data centers that we are seeing being built, who's investing in that? Are we seeing private sector players coming to the table, particularly international companies?
Yeah, we definitely are. If you look at where East Africa sits on the map, right, its strategic location is actually what is driving investors to come and invest in Kenya, in Kenya in particular, just given the access to the undersea fiber optic cables. Kenya was actually called the gateway to Africa, just given its excellent connectivity to global infrastructure on the platform. That said, what investors are really looking for is renewable sustainability, right? So
Yeah.
Kenya and Ethiopia both have an abundant renewable energy supply, whether it's geothermal, whether it's hydro, or whether it's wind. And this is really what's making it attractive for sustainable and really cost-efficient data center operations to be set up. And the third thing that international investors are really looking for is, I mentioned earlier that the region is really undeveloped when it comes to things like, or asset classes like data centers, right? Especially when you compare it to South Africa. So again, this provides a high growth opportunity for investors looking to get in early and to make a higher return. So it really is the international investors who have got who've got a very close eye on East Africa when it comes to data centers.
So the fundamentals really seem to be positive. I was just looking at economic expectations for the region, and it's expected to grow by about 5.9% for 2025-2026. With that being said, right, that just makes it even more attractive because of its growth prospects. But let's talk about government, right? When it comes to policies, regulations, are those regulations conducive for investment?
I mean, so the government is definitely doing its piece, right? In trying to attract foreign investment. And you've got things, if you look at land issues, for example, as much as they are trying to digitalize land registries and progress is being made on that front, owning land it can be a complicated issue, it can be a political issue, and it can sometimes be undocumented. And of course, what that does is then it raises, the risks of disputes and therefore delays in securing clean titles and therefore getting projects off the ground. But that said, what they are trying to do on the flip side is provide tax breaks, to make it more attractive for foreign investors. They're also trying to roll out investor-friendly reforms, which ultimately what they're trying to do is support long-term growth and attract those foreign investors into East Africa. So as much as there are challenges in what the government is doing, but there are definitely more opportunities, if you ask me, in the plus points of what the government is trying to roll out.
And just quickly before I let you go, talk to me about the opportunities perhaps the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement also presents within that region, especially considering the infrastructure needs to unlock further trade and development within the continent.
Yeah, so I mean, we're trying to do a lot with the East Africa community just to start with, right? So regional integration has actually promoted a lot of free trade and collaboration between the neighboring countries within the East Africa community. And I think what we're seeing there is a lot of real estate players who have real estate portfolios across the jurisdictions are actually finding this hugely beneficial. So no reform comes or no policy comes without its challenges. And I do think that we will make significant headway. All the countries in the East African community are on the same page with respect to the expectations on growth. So I do think that that the benefits of this will outdo the challenges that come with it.
All right, let's leave it there. Zahara, thanks so much for your time and just sharing those insights. And that was Zahara Khanbai, Director of Commercial Property Finance, East Africa at Absa.